Hi, my name is Kay. I am an art student in the United States, and I am your instructor for Drawing 1 Shapes, Proportions, and Perspective. This is an online hobby course that I'm teaching, and like I talked about in the first video, hopefully you're going through these in order. The first video is on shape. This is our second video on proportions. So I kind of introduced myself in the first one, so I'm going to skip that for this. But today we're going to talk about proportions, and proportions is how we measure things in art. So it's really quintessential and important to being able to draw that you understand how to map the proportions of anything, an object, a person, an animal, a landscape. All of these have proportions to them, and it's important that we be able to map them. So that is today's lesson. What are proportions? So I have some definitions for you. Proportions, the definition of proportions is the proper relation between things or parts. It is how things look and are sized compared to other things. In art, we don't measure things with a ruler. You can take an image and a piece of paper next to it, and you can measure how big each thing is and copy it over. There's a whole thing called the grid method, which I can talk to you about if you'd like me to. I don't use it personally, which is why I'm not teaching it, where you map out your reference in a grid, and then you copy it square by square over. And that is a more mathematical approach to mapping things out and sizing things in a drawing. Proportions is the more kind of free flow thing, and I think it's more beneficial in the long run because it lets you draw from life. If you're drawing from real life, if you're sitting on a park bench trying to draw a park, you can't draw a grid over that park. So knowing proportions is important. If something is proportional, it is scaled correctly in relation to itself. What I also didn't say was, and to other objects. It's scaled proportionate to itself and the things around it. It looks like it belongs in the space, is really what's most important. The Greeks had a mathematical perfect set of perfect proportions to draw people with, which we'll talk about, and we still use them as kind of a base starting point when we draw people today. Proportions are also helped in measure and define where to lay things out in a composition. We talked about composition last time. The proportions help us if we're making our own composition. We can use the golden ratio to know where to put things, or just to know how far in to map things out when looking at an image and trying to replicate it, which is how we start learning to draw. We draw from reference, and we draw from life, and we try and recreate it to the best of our ability, and then we work on stylization and coming up with our own ideas and working without a reference after years and years of practice. I still use a reference for most things I do today. I might combine references and make my own references to an extent to get what I want, but I still use a reference when I draw. All the time, every time. When we draw from life, we choose one part of the subject to use as a unit of measurement so that we can draw everything in proportion to itself. When we draw people, we use the head as the proportion of measurement, and we measure everything in how many heads long or wide or tall it is. Here's the Greek proportions. So Greeks were obsessed with perfection. They were obsessed with mathematical perfections of humans and gods, and so when they portray gods, they use these perfect proportions to sculpt them in these big sculptures I'm sure you've seen before in school. If not, look it up. Look up like Greek sculptures. Michelangelo did a bunch. They're really cool. Ancient Greek sculptures, yeah, I talked about that. So we can see here they've measured head size. So they've measured the head size and they've kind of copied it. And we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 heads tall. The Greek mathematical correct proportions had men at 8 heads tall. Most men in real life are not 8 heads tall. So when we draw from reference photos and things, we count their head and how many of their head tall they are. But as a general standard, 8 heads tall. Your shoulders are each a head width apart from the center. So your shoulders across here are 1 head, 2 head wide. You have 1 head down your head length from your bottom of your chin To your elbows, you have 2 heads. Another 2 heads to your wrists, or to your fingertips, I'm sorry. And then from your waist to your feet, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So the upper body is usually 3 or 4 heads, and the bottom of the body is usually 4 heads. And you can see how that's mapped here. It's important to know the standards of proportions so that we can know what we're looking for when we measure the proportions in real life or of whatever our subject is that we're drawing. The golden ratio, 1 to 1.618. It creates this spiral or these decreasing squares, rectangles, that you can see over here. This is how we get it. It's a long side divided by the short side equals the longest side. And it forms this spiral, and we use these mappings to map out proportions of things. This is a really cool mathematical phenomenon as well as an art phenomenon because it occurs in nature. This exact ratio occurs all the time in nature, in pine cones, in trees, in landscapes. It's very, very interesting. But it forms these spirals, and we see them all the time. Like this. And so we've used this spiral to map out the composition of where to put her face and her body, or in this, where the trees are. We can see them in nature in like shells and things. I also talked about pine cones. If you look at a pine cone from the top down, you can see the spirals down. Even in graphic design, they use it. They've mapped this cat in graphic design, or even in photography, they use it to map these pleasant ways of laying out pictures and things. So the golden ratio, don't stress too much about it, but it is how we measure proportions and setting up things on a page. Okay, this is kind of complicated. I promise it's not as hard as you think. There is a method to measuring by sight. And the way we do this is we stand back from an object. So if you're looking at an object that you want to draw, like if I was going to draw my microphone right now, I would stand back from it and I would extend my arm all the way out so my arm is straight, my elbow is extended. And you're going to, I like to close one eye, you don't have to. Basically measure from the tip. You're holding a pen or a paintbrush or a tool in your hand, and you're going to measure from the tip, and you're going to slide your thumb down till it reaches the bottom of the object. If you're measuring a person, you would do that for their head, and then now you have that length in your field of vision marked out on this pencil. So you can then count it and use it kind of like a ruler going down. I'll show you. I'll turn my camera on and I can show you. If you bear with me. Hi, this is my face. Hello. So if I want to measure this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scoot back. I'm going to hold my tool out. I'm going to close one eye, and I'm going to measure the top of the microphone, right? So now in my field of vision, when I'm sitting from that specific position, don't move like I just did, this is how long from tip to my thumb the top of that microphone is. So I can then count 1, 2. So this is about 3 heads of my microphone tall. So then if I wanted to draw the microphone, I could draw 3 circles and know, okay, the first head is that actual head of the microphone, the second head fell from this point to this point, and the third head fell from that point to the bottom. And I could draw it out that way, and it just helps you map things out on a paper. I can give you an example if you need one. Again, feel free to email me. I'm always available for that. But that is how we measure things by sight. This is a very important method. This is how we view things and we draw. It lets you visually mark out and then copy onto your page where the curves of things are, the segments of things are. Basically, that's what you're doing. You're breaking things down into segments. Not everything you draw is going to be one-to-one. If you do that, it doesn't need to be one-to-one. You don't need to take that length you measured on your pencil and put it on your paper and draw that specific length. You can mark it out on the page based on how you want it in your composition. And we'll practice that here in a minute in the activities. Oh boy. Okay. Sorry, I just kind of revealed the answers, so hopefully you didn't see them. But we're going to practice measuring things by the size of the head. I have 4 pictures here. I have 4 people. Go ahead and scoop back from whatever device you're looking at. I hope you're watching this on a computer. That would make it the most easy. But if not, you can kind of like set your phone up, like tilt it against something and stand back a little bit. But you can, or press your finger against the screen and measure with your fingers. Just kind of measure how many heads tall each of these people are, so that you can get a feel for how that we practice that. I'll go ahead and give you a second to do that. All right. Here are the answers. I've revealed them. I didn't wait very long. I'm trying to get through this so that you have time to do your activity. The first girl, she's on her toes. She's a ballerina, and ballerinas and dancers are really fun to draw. They're very muscular. They've got great muscle tone, so they're great for practicing learning to draw the human body, and I highly recommend it. Because if you understand how muscles flex and bend, you will be able to better draw. This girl is probably 7 heads tall if she was standing on her flat feet, but she's up on point. So she's pointed her toes, she's standing on her toes, which gives her an extra head. So she's 8 heads tall, and you can see I've marked them with circles. This second girl is doing a yoga pose, and I have measured down the long side of her body end to end. And she's about 7.5 heads tall, because if you look here about her foot, we don't have another full head. If I drew another full head, it'd go off the bottom of the image. But it's like about half. So if you like cut this circle in half, you'd have like another half circle. So 7.5 heads. And then we can be like, okay, to where her hands are from her chin to where the tip of her fingers are is 1. Her torso is 3 heads long. Her legs are 3 heads long. And then her foot is an extra half a head. And so you could map that out and make those notes for yourself on your drawing and then go from there. This is a child. Children have different proportions. I have by no means mastered drawing children, but the best way to do that is to draw them. There are great sites you can look up to find reference photos and things for drawing adults, children, men, women, anything you want. Which is where I got these images. And we will do a little bit of figure drawing in our Zoom class. So rest assured, you will get practice in this, I promise. But she's 5.5 heads tall. She's got about a half a head, almost a full head here at the bottom, but not quite. So I said 5.5. She's got about 1.5 long torso, and then 2.5 long leg length. So that's how I would map that out if I was going to draw her. This man is 6.5 heads tall, because again, we have this extra bit where his feet are at the bottom. I would have marked it out, but I couldn't draw half circles in my program I'm using to make these presentations. But yeah, we can see that his back is 2 heads, and then he's got these 3 head long legs. So this should make it pretty clear to you that the legs are longer than the upper body. For most people, most adult people, when you draw them, your proportions will be somewhere between 6 to 8 heads tall. And typically, the top of the body will be about 2 heads, the bottom of the body will be 3. If you have a taller person, or they're pointing their toes, the legs might be longer. And that'll become clear if you mark out where those things are. Now we're going to practice measuring still life proportions. So in both these images, there's an apple. I'm asking you to use the apple as a reference of measurement to measure the height of the other objects in the image. Specifically focus on these vases and containers that are in the images. Like there's a jug in the first image, and then like a vase or a pitcher in the second one. So go ahead and use that method where you sit back from your screen, you use your pencil, or you can use your fingers on your screen to kind of measure out how tall each of these things are by the size of the apple. So measure the size of the apple and then use that size to measure the image. I'll go ahead and give you a second. All right, I'm going to go ahead and show the answers. So if you're not ready, go ahead and pause the video. Awesome. So I've done them in different colors so we can distinguish what I'm talking about. The first image, the apple is circled in red, or like a pinky color. It's red for the most part. And these green circles are the same size as that red circle, but it's the height of that jar from base to top. It's a little tricky because it's covered by those flowers, so I'm kind of having to guess where the bottom of that jar is. Or, it's not a jar, it's like a jug. But then I would know that the neck is like 1 1/4 apples long, and then it flares out, and the base is about 2 3/4 apples long. And so I could measure that out. And it's pretty much 1 apple wide too, which is nice. These pears are about double the length of the apple, so it's 1 apple end to end the length, and they're all pretty much like that. They're all very similar, but you can measure all of them if you wanted to. In the second image, I've circled the apples, 1 in green, 1 in red. The reason I did that is because I circled the apple I was using in red, and then I made sure the other apple was the same size, because just because you have 2 of the same thing in an image doesn't mean they're the same size. So I compared it. They are about the same size. The second one's a little bit bigger, at least in the way it's turned to face me. Again, our picture is about, I've done it in pink here, and I'll get to the orange in a second, I'll explain that. Is about, and I've measured to that tip over here. I just didn't want to overlap it with this apple down here, so they're over here. But I've measured to the very top, but it's about 4 tall, and so we know that that spout at the top is about 1 tall, and that the base itself, it flares out, and then the base is 3 long. These orange measure the handle, and so I would line up where the start, like it's about the middle of this first apple height that the handle starts, and then the third one down is where it ends. And it's about 2 apples in length, and so you can draw the curvature but know that that's the size of it, which is super helpful. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, feel free to contact me or rewatch the video. Your activity is to draw a still life. What I want you to do is create a still life of objects in your own home. So go around your house, find 4 to 5 objects in your home, place them on a table, and then I want you to take your sketchbook or your piece of paper in your lap, find something hard to write on, like a hardback book or something, so that you have a hard surface to write on. A clipboard is nice. I want you to sit back from it and draw from life. I want you to draw these still lifes on your piece of paper. I did them really small. You can do them on a full-size piece of paper. That's actually what I recommend for starting out. Bigger makes it easier, but I draw really small, typically. So that's why mine are squared in. But you're going to draw these still lifes using proportions, trying to make it proportionate to itself. If you want feedback from me, I recommend that you take a picture of your still life and send that to me as well. Again, you can always contact me through email. My email is always in the description of the videos. But yeah, send me the picture and your drawing so that I can compare them. Because if I don't know what your reference looks like, I can't tell you if your drawing matches the reference. And at the end of the day, it doesn't need to be perfect. If your art is displayed in a museum, no one sees the reference. No one sees the actual woman who was the Mona Lisa sitting and posing for the painting, but we all see the painting and we think it looks great. It could be completely inaccurate for all we know, but we don't see the reference. So if it's not perfect, it doesn't need to be, but it is a starting point that should help you. Again, try include 4 to 5 objects in your still life. I want you to focus on shape and form and less on light and dark. So we haven't learned shading yet, so don't worry about shading your drawing. Just kind of work on those shapes. Break your images down into organic shapes, measure, and do that. And you can see that I did that here. Everything is really basic shapes. I kept it really simple for you. As to make it representative of what I want you to do. You can like color, if you have something that's really dark, like black, you can color it in so that you can know it's not a transparent object. But that's by no means necessary. I want you to focus on the contour lines, which is the lines that define an object on the outside, and less on detail. Awesome. I hope that this is enjoyable, and I will see you in the next lesson.